Well, welcome everyone to our Inside the Box lecture series for fall 2023. Tonight, we're stepping into the world of spatial transformation with our lecture series, Interior Design and the Art of Rendering Space. We're going to explore the fusion of creativity and technology in bringing design visions to life. We have expert speakers from animation and computer arts fields, and I have a special thanks to Chair Jimmy Calhoun of the BFA 3D Animation and Visual Effects Department. 5 years ago, we both talked about the parallels and the overlaps in our two departments and what we do. And we thought it would be really fun to explore those overlaps. And so this entire year, we're going to do that. It presents some other new careers because of these overlaps. I think you'll be amazed. So I thank Jimmy for finding these amazing speakers for us. I also want to welcome the students from that department. This is the first time we've done that, and I'm delighted. I want to welcome Thomas Sidman, and I have to say he's a fellow St. Louisan, so I'm extra excited about this. And Thomas is a 3D digital artist, photographer, and Navy veteran. We thank him for that. My father was a World War II veteran, and they deserve all the thanks. He's well-versed in all aspects of 3D in architectural visualization and product design. Upon graduating from SVA, he jumped headfirst into the architectural world of New York City, visualizing digitally now iconic locations like the World Trade One, the High Line, and Hudson Yards. Spreading further out, he has worked on product design visualizations with top companies like Johnson & Johnson, Tommy Hilfiger, Calvin Klein, and Tiffany & Company. When he's not doing 3D, he's playing video games, board games, or sewing his next piece of garb or hammering out new armor for medieval reenactment that he does on the weekends. Boy, I'd love to see that. Title is Trompe in Interior Design, a 3D artist perspective into interior design, and we welcome Thomas.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that awesome introduction. There's a lot of big words in there. I know. Yeah, so we'll get started in a second. Again, thank you all for coming out, and, 7 o'clock at night. And, I remember being in college and being like, oh, would I go to one of these at 7 o'clock tonight? And I did. And it did pay off. I got to listen to a lot of speakers and stuff. So let me share my screen here and we will get started. Can everybody see that okay? Okay, great. So Trompe, that is it's a French term. And what I would like to talk about today is my interactions between working in 3D and interior designers. In reference to that, a lot of architectural. So I graduated from SVA in 2014. And when I did, I immediately jumped into 3D architecture. It was more of a moment where I got before my senior year, I gotten an internship and I fell in love with it. It includes everything that I ever wanted, because I originally came to go to school to make video games. I graduated high school in 1999. If that puts in perspective, there was nothing out there for video games at the time. So I went and got an art degree and then joined the Navy, and then the Navy, got me here in New York. So, and I jumped right into the visualization world. It offers world building. It offers animation. You're doing all kinds of stuff. Unreal Engine is something that we are using a lot now in the architectural world, and it's on the same par as a video game, only less programming, honestly. So let's get started. I give a bit of a description on what this awesome French word means. It's to deceive the eye in French, an artistic term for a highly realistic optical illusion of three-dimensional space and objects on a two-dimensional surface. Sounds very familiar if you read below. CGI, or computer-generated graphics, are graphics that use three-dimensional representation of geometric data. It calculates stuff, it produces images, but most of these are three-dimensional images that get turned into two-dimensional images on a flat space. That is your screen that you're looking at now. We're all 2D right now. So that kind of ties in together. We're going to play a little game real quick. I hope everybody's at least seen one Matrix movie. You're going to pick the red pill or blue pill, or you're going to figure out which image is real and which image is not. Is this one real? Or is this one? Give you a moment to think about it.
Shall we guess, students?
Right or left?
You see, I'm used to this sort of thing where one looks like it's CGI, but then the other one's actually CGI. So like my eyes are telling me the one on the right looks less realistic, but then like the one on the right is like, oh, is they're trying to trick me or something,
I thought the same thing, and you are correct because you have a calibrated eye there, 3D computer artist. Yes, that is the digital image. This is done by a very famous New York architectural photographer, Peter Willis. Look him up. I may got the first name wrong, but I will link that, during the QA. Next one.
What about the hands though? Did you want us to guess about the two hands or the two pills?
Well, the two pills is kind of a reference to real or not real.
Okay.
So if you choose one or the other, you live in your fantasy world.
Someone hasn't seen The Matrix.
You're right. Sorry.
So wait, sorry, go back. Which was the real one and which wasn't? Left or right?
The real one is on the left. The right one is of digital image that I created.
Right.
So next one. Real or fake?
Come on, students, jump in.
Once
right
again,
one is
I'm gonna.
fake?
Yeah, that's what I'm guessing too.
Why?
I mean, the sky. Not sure.
There's just like it's really hard to put into words. There's just something ever so subtly off about it.
That's what we like to
Like,
refer to as the uncanny valley. So something
Yeah,
you're
there we go.
something you're going to experience and something that you're going to use. You might be revolting against it right now. And yes, you're correct. The right one is a digital image. That's 75 Rockefeller Center. Another reason why that's fake is because there at zero time in New York City is Rockefeller Center that empty.
Yeah.
Even at 5 o'clock in the morning. You know why? Because I went out at 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning trying to take photos of this place as backplate photos. It did not work. So yes, uncanny valley is something that we deal with a lot in 3D, especially when it comes. You hear it a lot when it's characters. You see 3D characters and there's just not something right about it. There's just something missing, and it's really hard to put your mind on. And you can actually sit there and rack your brain for hours on it. But I do it on purpose. Because a lot of what I do in architectural visualization, a lot of what you'll be doing with interior design is getting your client to bite. And you have to present something that pops, it snaps, like something that really triggers an emotion. Because one of the first things we're going to talk about is every design that you do has to tell a story. The story is important. Above all else, it could be the most perfectly technical, well-lit scene. But if you didn't have a story in your head when creating it, something's not going to be there. And it's probably going to fall off even deeper into the uncanny valley. So moving on. Last one. Real or fake?
I'm gonna guess the one on the left is the fake.
Other students?
Well, you're the 3D artist. I didn't know there's gonna be 3D artists in here. I would have changed the game up a little bit, but no, I'm kidding. Yes, the left one on the left is technically perfect, right? Like it's the lighting's done just enough. It looks very real, but there's something not quite right about it. And the reason that is probably the perspective. The perspective is really pulled. It's really anamorphic, but it's meant to show depth to the space. This is actual photo I taken, which could technically be fake because of the 4K that comes up in the camera lens. Your human eye does not produce this at all. So when you see those anamorphic lens flares that J.J. Abrams likes to do, know for a fact that your eye doesn't actually do that. It's all to convey a mood. This is actually the building, the Museum of Buildings in Washington, D.C. It's a beautiful building, and I highly suggest, if you're into seeing big, open, Roman style classical architecture, this is the place to go. Plus, they have some really cool construction and building techniques that they did throughout the history of America. So what makes interior design and CDR artists similar? Well, one, we have to have a calibrated eye, and we just kind of tested that, understanding, what makes it look real, what makes it look what I like to call hyper real. So I talked about it already. Storytelling, a space should tell a story, be it real or virtual. When you walk into a space, it has to have a story. If you walk into a space and you just pass it, then there's no story there. New York is hard to find a place that doesn't have a story. So it's very fun to walk around the city. The lines are important. It defines the space, its perspective, it breaks it, it creates flow. I'll talk more about what the line means in 3D, but when you're designing and when you're doing interior design, or if you're doing any sort of design, we're all kind of artists here, is you have to start at the very basic. And honestly, it's to draw a line. Whatever you do, be it on Photoshop, in 3D Max, you're drawing a line of some sorts. Spatial awareness, knowing perspective, the depth and flow of the space. So a lot of 3D artists are known to have good spatial awareness. Spatial awareness is the way that you interact with the environment, your body in a way. If you're reflexes, or just being able to know sense of direction, or being able to understand depth of field, those are all important things, both in 3D and interior design. A space has to feel a certain way based on how you shape it and the size of it and what you fill it with. Thought toward light.
Oh my god.
Thought toward light. If we don't have light, we don't see anything. If I do a render in 3D Max or Maya, if I don't put any lights in it, nothing comes out. There's no light there. Unless I give it light. So light is sculpted. I sculpt light. The way I do 3D is setting up light in a way that it creates additional shapes in the scene. It adds accent. It takes away. It adds to. It sculpts the space. It messes with color, and it messes with contrast, and that's all stuff when you first get into 3D. And I hope everybody does, because it's kind of like Photoshop now. It's kind of like how Microsoft Word used to be. I mean, knowing something in 3D, be it Blender or whatever, that's just the future right now. It changes the color. You'll put a light in a scene and you're like, wow, isn't what it's supposed to look like. And the more you understand how light works, and the more you understand how color works. The importance of color. Contrasting, complementary. Color changes the mood. Color sets the story. Color could solely set a story. If you look at Wes Anderson and what he does with his movies, he deals a lot with color. His shots are very simple. They're very straightforward, but he sculpts the space with light. He uses color a certain way to accent the mood. The space is set up in a way where he may take away depth or add to based on how he fills it. That there's always a line. It's very sharp lines with him. And it's a story. He's telling a story just with all of that. Texture. I like to refer to texture as drama. You can fill a space with color, but as soon as you add texture, it's like, ooh, what is that? I want to know more. You want to touch it. You want to feel it. That's the whole purpose of texture, is if you're an interior design artist, you want your client to walk into that space and immediately want to touch that couch or that chair or the floor or the wall, or just look at it. The same with a 3D artist. Texture is how you get out of the uncanny valley, or you reach it to a level where you're trying to appeal to whoever it's being looked at, be it someone just looking at your stuff in a gallery to the client that you're trying to sell this space to, or a video game. You know, you're trying to get these players to play your game and go, wow, this looks great. Balance. I'm sure we're all artists. We've all went through a basic art class, the rule of thirds, the golden ratio, and we talk about empty space. All of these are extremely important. Balance in a scene can make or break it. You can put all this really cool stuff in there, but if it doesn't have balance, then it really doesn't go anywhere. So I've given you all these terms, and let's kind of apply them and talk about them a bit more and kind of put it together. So this is what I like to call the storyboard. I do this in 3D. It's a white box render. In 3D architecture, a lot of times you're going to get a model already made by the architect in AutoCAD, and then you're going to import it into whatever program you work in at that time. It could be Blender, it could be Unreal. It's probably going to be 3D Studio Max. That's kind of the standard. So you flesh out the space, and the first thing you see here is all those things I just talked about: the line, the empty space, understanding the spatial awareness. Like, where are we at right now? You can kind of look at it and you can be like, oh, we're in a hangar. Oh, we're in a dance hall. Oh, we could be in a lobby. Could be in a theater. You don't know yet until you start adding things to the space. You start using lines to sculpt the space out. At a certain point, the line stops the sculpt and you have to move further. And by doing that, you start adding more scenery to the point where you start lighting. So this is the first base light. I feel like everybody, if you're designing something, if you got your panel of textures and cloth and different types of paints, and you got it all set out this page, shine different lights on it. See how it interacts with each other. If it's on the floor, put it on the floor. Grab a chair. Like, I know, Kit, you were talking earlier about you're mostly digital, but being a 3D artist, you have to understand the real. Like, you have to pick up and touch things. Like, if I was going to model this mug right now, I have to pick it up and look at it and feel the texture. So I know how to recreate that. You know, that's why I love interior designers, because I can go over and I'm like, hey, I'm working on this rendering, but I'm trying to get this texture. They're like, oh, I got something similar right here. And you can touch it and you can feel it and you can see how it moves in the light. And that helps your mind calculate in whatever program you work with how to get that light a certain way. And then you get more light and it starts really filling out the space. Now there's a story. What is this space now? It looks like a hotel lobby. You're probably right. So if you noticed before, there really isn't that much life there. There is life, there's a story, but as soon as you apply color, light, reflectivity, you start seeing, oh, wow, this is a whole different space. What is this? And then you could stop here and be like, hey, this is good. I like where it's at. But we're in the uncanny valley right now. We're deep in it. Someone's going to look at this and like, that's a rendering. Until you put it in and you finalize, you put a detail in, you put a flower in, you push the lights beyond. You look at some of these lights and they're blown out, but when you look at lights in real life, they're mostly blown out. A lot of that really tied in light you see in all these photos is all redone. So that's what I say. If you're a 3D artist or you're an interior designer, talk to each other. You're gonna run into each other, especially a 3D artist in New York City. Like, architecture is where it's at. It moves back and forth between gaming and architecture. We do the same. We're working with the same stuff now. It used to be a pretty far gap, and now it's come together. And I highly suggest, looking at architecture. This is a great city for it. Some of the best architecture in the world here. You can look at almost every single type of architecture. You could just walk down the street and find it. Now we're talking about mood and lighting, and the image these are both 3D, by the way. The image on the left is a special one for me because it's the first one I ever rendered at a professional level for a company. So I have always kept it. And really the great thing was Go ahead.
Did you build everything in the scene yourself?
Pretty much. So the cool thing, like I didn't do the laptop. I didn't do the chairs. There's so many assets that, like you're gonna go to a company and there's gonna be assets there. A lot of time you're gonna be doing something that a lot of interior artists do, which is building a set. You're building a scene. You're world building.
No, I was asking if you modeled everything yourself.
Oh, just about everything. The chairs, the computer. That's about it. Everything else is all modeled or a backplate photo. So that was actually taken. Yeah. The thing about 3D is like, it's really cool if you model all that stuff, but a lot of times you don't have to. And when you're in, you could spend days and weeks and months and years making this one really cool scene. That's not how it works in the real world. You have to be able to produce a high quality image at a pretty substantial pace and be able to problem solve. I think that goes back and forth between interior design and your problem solving. Architecture, you're problem solving. Being a 3D artist, you're problem solving. Your client's going to come to you and they're like, I want to see this. And you're like, great. They don't tell you how to do it. You should know how to do it, or at least you should have the tools to be able to figure out how to do it. You know, this was one of 12 renders for one space. So I had 12 other renders to do. So going and doing a backplate photo and using pre-built stuff that, you know, these are actual physical things that are in the real world. These chairs actually exist. You know, it's easy to get the model and put it in there. So then rather than me spending time modeling out these really cool looking chairs, I can spend time refining the light and really selling the space. The client came back to me and really the only thing they said about the space was, at the time I had the chairs yellow. They said, make them black. And that's it. Same with the bathroom. I mean, a lot of the toilet, I obviously didn't model the toilet. I mean, you could, but there's no need, you know. I concentrated on the textures. I concentrated on the lighting. I concentrated on, you know, getting stuff set in a way to kind of present it to the client to sell this apartment space. So with that, cinematography is everything when it comes to architecture, when it comes to interior design. You're going to be taking photos of your spaces. You look at magazines like, you know, an interior design magazine, there's someone taking photos of that, or their 3D renderings. So 3D is very much cinematic. And if you're a 3D artist, I highly suggest taking a class in the film department. Be it cinematic lighting, I did. It was a great class, taught me a lot about how to light a space, and it completely 100% transferred over to 3D. And I'm pretty sure interior design would work the same way. If you know how to change the light of a space, that you have full control of the light, just like 3D, you can do really cool stuff with it. So this scene, if you look at it, it doesn't look like there's too much different colors going on. But when you look at the color grade at the bottom, it goes from one very, very far in black all the way to almost white, like a very, very light gray, even though it's very subtle. When you look at this scene, it's just almost the same color palette, but then you add pink. So this is a complementary or contrasting color. This is high school, elementary school color wheel. I have a color wheel at work. I still use a color wheel. That's stuff that you have to look at it in the real, and you have to kind of calibrate your eye to do it in the virtual, and that goes vice versa. So watch films, you know, look at film stills. They're inspiring for how there's obviously interior designers who set these spaces. Someone went in here and set this space to deliver an emotion a certain way, be it an interior designer or probably not a 3D artist. This was way before we got good at 3D, but yeah. You know, again, contrasting colors, you know, but it's a complementary and a contrasting color in a way, because this is a Greenwich American Center in Connecticut. What they wanted to do is they wanted to bring the outside in. And to do that, it was green. And again, we're looking at the space. We're looking at how the light comes together. It's obviously not real. but it sure does look real. It is, you're going to show up to the space. While it's not going to look this way, that's not the point. It's going to look pretty darn close. This is hyper real. Our eyes don't see it at this type of pull and draw. But with that, you know, making sure all these materials are real and making sure all these chairs, you know, there's just a little bit of a distortion in each chair. And you can think about that in interior design. You can think about that in 3D. You make these perfectly aligned things in 3D, these perfectly aligned chairs, or you can do a perfectly aligned chair in a space when you or fabric. But if you give it some irregularity, it makes it more real. These chairs, unless it's a robot army doing whatever you want to do in this office space in Greenwich, Connecticut, all these chairs are not going to be pushed in the same. They're not going to be all the same pushed in. So, you know, the client wanted it this way to kind of show this, but still, I made sure I added just a little bit of subtlety in the wheels, somewhat. I mean, also you got to listen to your client. This is a screenshot from an actual online virtual space that I created through a proprietary engine from a company I was working for. And they said, just design this space. I put a lot of stuff into it. There's a lot of lines involved in the roof. There's a lot of negative space, dark space, all kinds of complementary colors. It was meant to, it's meant to be overwhelming. You come into the space, there's so much to do. You got to pick one. By that time, the person who works at HPE has already sold you on a new server rack. And that's how it works. This is actually the interior design space that I work in my office. It's one of the best ones I've ever been in. I can come and check out materials. I can feel how the glass works. These glass panes down here, I can grab them. I can hold them up to the light. I can be like, okay, that's an index of refraction of like 2.8 or 1.45, you know, and kind of figure out how to make that work in my renderings, and vice versa. You know, sometimes we have the interior designers come to me and are like, hey, I want to see this material on this chair. Can you put that there? And I say, absolutely. And then we put it in a space and we see how it feels and we see how it's going to look and we apply different lights to it. You know, that's the great thing about 3D working with something so physical as interior design, is it really helps them sell their design, but also helps them really figure out their design at the same time. But yeah, this is my interior designers. There's 2 or 3 of them that just come through, and I mean, they're digging through the baskets all day. But I occasionally go over there and touch the material. They love that. They love, so long as you don't take it, as long as you don't mess up their little vignettes or mood boards. You know, if you look at it and you touch it and you feel it, you know, that it really helps me understand how to create my textures. So how I create my textures. If you're not 3D, then this is going to be kind of crazy to you. But if you are 3D, you're probably already going to understand. So the 4 things, there's other things that you can use, but the 4 things that I use to create a texture in a 3D space is a diffuse map, which is the color. And that's pretty much all there is. Color and maybe some shade on it. A height map, which is a map to simulate depth and kind of thickness of the material. And then you have the normal map. Normal map actually uses RGB color and different points to help the image kind of show where the light hits and where the light doesn't hit, or how much the light hits it. Ambient occlusion, or AO, is contact shadow. It's depth. It's one of those parts of 3D that once we had it really kind of changed the game, because it adds depth, it adds realism, and it takes that uncanny valley down to an insane level where you can hardly tell, just because it adds so much realism. And then when we added a normal map, that added even more, because now we're really figuring out how photons bounce off an object and how to calculate that through a flat texture. This is Wicker, by the way. I just used it recently for a chair. Texture also sells something. Bread. You know, we know how bread feels, we know how bread tastes, but how can you make that look that way in 3D? And that comes from a diffuse map, a height map, a normal map, ambient occlusion, getting your lighting right, understanding, you know, we're calculating light, and this is something to think about in the real space, you know, interior designer or 3D or just walking around, is light is coming in a certain way. It's bouncing off this glass a certain way. Then it's hitting this bread a certain way. So how's that light differ from this light out here? And that's, I mean, a lot of these get automatically calculated, but it still needs to be looked at. Like, what is your you know, how clear is this glass? This glass above it is not 100% clear. You know, it's actually minorly frosted to give this set of steam almost. The client didn't want steam in the space because also it was a moving space, and that's particles, and we didn't have a budget for that. But you know, how do you convey warmth and taste and flavor in a two-dimensional image that isn't even real? And that's through touching material, knowing how material feels, going through the steps and building out a material. For instance, product design. I highly encourage everybody be a 3D artist, be a artist. I mean, Andy Warhol did paintings of Campbell's soup, and it's worth millions and millions of dollars now. And it was product design at its highest level. Where does it, you know, it's art, you know, these are two product renderings I did to kind of really sell the realism. There's different levels of texture. Like, what is the texture of these little flat rechargeable, sit your phone on rechargeable things compared to these right here? How can you tell the difference in this image? It's the light. It's the way that the texture hits the light. These are shiny. These are reflective. They reflect off light. So they have these really white spaces. The same light's hitting this, but they're entirely dark because a flat matte rubber material absorbs light. You could put a very harsh light on it and maybe you'll get a little bit of color change, but a lot of times this absorbs light. And the best way to figure that out is to touch things. You got to know how things look in the real in order to kind of recreate them in 3D. Going into V-Ray, going into Corona, going into Unreal, understanding how those textures work, opening it up in Substance Painter and building a texture. You know, we have all these powerful tools to make textures now, but the most powerful tool you have at the very beginning is to touch and feel something. Even if it's not exactly what you're making, you can look at it and be like, okay, like, you know, looking at how different metals work. Like, oh, I got this, I'm trying to make this brushed aluminum. Oh, well, hey, my little lamp over here has a little brushed aluminum on it. How's that look? Oh, okay. And recreate it that way. So again, you know, being a 3D artist, you have like, I say when I do my 3D work, I dive into the matrix. I plug in, I chip in, I'm in cyberspace. That's how I feel. But honestly, you have to know the real, you have to feel the real in order to be able to create the virtual. So same with this sunscreen, you know, this is a challenge because it's multiple layers inside of each other. This glass isn't really glass. It's a subsurface scatter that has a very high transparency rate. The reason I did that is because the way that this plastic's thickness is, you can't make it 100% glass because it would be fake. This has texture and has a very fine grain. So you have to go in there and you have to build the texture and you have to test it with the light and kind of sculpt the light. I used an HDR map that I made myself from scratch, HDR Studio, to get the light just right to kind of sell this. And you can tell the difference between what is plastic and what isn't. You know, this thing that's inside this plastic is inside the plastic. You know, that's how I got it to work. And that comes from understanding texture, understanding balance, understanding the light, how contrasting colors work. you know, I was working with designers on the label, like the labels get changed as I was doing the 3D, you know, like maybe we need to add purple to this to kind of contrast the colors well. So now you can really see because what's the first thing you're looking for when you're looking for sunscreen? You're looking for that number. So if that number's purple and everything's pink and white, it's going to pop. So